Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this conversation with Austin Sauerbrei about his newly released book, Trouble at Coal Creek. And thanks to Haymarket for hosting us tonight and publishing this book. It's a real honor to be here among the Haymarket company. My name is Katey Lauer. I'm a longtime organizer in Southern West Virginia and Central Appalachia, and I'm especially excited about this book because I'm also the co-founder of the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum in Matewan, West Virginia, and feel some kindredness to this history. Mine and Austin's worlds have crossed a number of times in the last decade, when Austin was a neighborhood and tenants organizer in Nashville, when Austin left that work to organize with AFL-CIO and some of its Eastern Tennessee chapters, and most recently when he moved into the position of executive director at SOCM, which is a 52-year-old, I can hardly believe it, member-led organization in Tennessee. And a lot of our connections, Austin, have been about organizing, and I didn't realize until you reached out to me about this book during the drafting process that you are also a talented illustrator and artist, and I'm excited we're going to get to see some of your artwork today as we talk about this book. And I'm just so glad to be included. One note I want to make is that, this book is, I just think, such a great example of like what a tool for popular education can be and what a spark for community conversations. And so if during this talk today you get a little bug and decide that you want to share this book with other people or host a conversation about it or use it as a teaching tool, you can order it right now on Haymarket and also reach out to Austin directly. And I know he'd be excited to chat with you about that. So
Yeah.
welcome all, and thanks, Austin, for inviting me to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
I think my first question for you is just, what's the story of how you came to write this book? Where did it come from?
Yeah. So I've always been a bit of a comics nerd from like all the way back to elementary school and middle school, all the way through today. So I've always had an interest in comics and that form of storytelling, and I've always been an amateur artist since as long as I can remember. I've doodled, I've sketched, and have really enjoyed that as like it's my go-to when I need to decompress. I go to my sketchbook. So I think for a long time, I've had in the back of my head a desire to attempt to tell a longer form story through that medium. And I never really found something that I was excited enough about, a story that I wanted to tell that that I could commit to. And so right about the time that I moved, my wife and I moved to East Tennessee, and I became an organizer for the Chattanooga and Knoxville Oak Ridge Labor Councils. I'd lived in Middle Tennessee for over a decade, and I was new to East Tennessee, and was really trying to get a little bit of an understanding of the history of the labor movement in East Tennessee. And so I was talking with a number of folks, doing some of my own research, and a good friend of mine named Michael Gilliland, who's a wonderful organizer in Chattanooga, coordinates these people's history tours in Chattanooga, which are just
cool.
wonderful introductions to people's movements in Chattanooga. But I'm pretty sure it was him that handed me a copy of a collected volume called Dixie Be Damned. And it was just like a series of sort of short nonfiction, sort of more academic text about some labor and people's movement histories in the broader region. And one of those stories was about the Coal Creek War. And it was, I think that initial thing that I read was probably like 7 pages long, but it sort of outlined the history of this series of uprisings and sort of the intersection of the struggle of these miners battling the coal industry with the convict-lease system, and this really powerful story about how the convict lease and the convicts that were used as strike breakers in the mines there was this alliance between these poor Appalachian miners and these predominantly black prisoners that were used by the state and used by the coal companies to undercut them, and how that this series of events that happened, an hour and a half from where I was living, actually led to the end of the convict lease system. And again, we talk about more, like, that's not the end of the story for sure, but it was a moment of this interesting alliance. So all that to say, did more research and just was so compelled both by the story, the fact that I'd never heard of it before, and most people that I talked to had lived in East Tennessee their whole life had never heard of these stories. So a combination of that and just the sheer drama of the story, I was like, I want to try telling this story. So I think what I had initially thought was going to be maybe like a 15, 20 page thing that I'd maybe like draw for myself and share with some people, ended up turning into a much larger project that took 4.5 years to complete. But I think the drama of the story, the fact that it's a story that I think is so important to tell, especially as the South gets branded and labeled as backwards and as not worthy of investment, it felt like that it was a compelling story that needed to be shared.
Well, I have to say this book humbled me a little bit, Austin, because I sort of fancy myself as someone who knows a good bit about union organizing in the coal fields and just miners exercising their collective power. And I had not heard this story before. So I was also just I'm one of the many people that didn't know about it. And I'm glad to have learned about it from reading it. The first thing I'll say I noticed in the book before we even get into the story is that there's this lovely dedication at the start that says "For Boomer." And I wondered, the first question I had reading it was, who's Boomer?
Mm-hmm.
To you. And I think it says in here, teller of tales, chronicler of history, son of East Tennessee, and thorn in the side of vultures and profiteers.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
So who's Boomer? Who's this dedicated to?
Yeah. So Boomer is an incredible human being who unfortunately passed away during the process of creating this book. But I was introduced to Boomer when I started doing research for this book. And Boomer lives in Rocky Top, Tennessee, which is the current name of Coal Creek, Tennessee. So it is the town where all these events took place. And he's a lifelong resident of that community. And come to find out, his, I believe, great-grandfather participated in the Coal Creek War, was a miner during that time. And he helped to start the Coal Creek Miners Museum, which is a small museum in Rocky Top, Tennessee, that's dedicated to telling the history of the miners in the region. And so he was one of the first people that I met and talked to, and over the course of several years ended up going and visiting him a number of times. And just learned so much. He is also, after we initially met, come to find out that SOCM, which is the organization I now direct, he was one of the founding staff members of SOCM as well, and was just an amazing community organizer on top of everything. But he's also a historian and just knew so much that went beyond just the academic texts that have been written about this subject. He actually had like stories that had been passed down from his grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents about the events. He knew every like little place in the hills where the events happened. And so he was just such of course, a resource for this book, but just such a gem of a person for our state and for our region. And so on that note, I think we actually have a short video. My good friend Whitney Kimball Coe, who works for a group called Rural Assembly, after I had met with Boomer a few times, they decided they wanted to do a story about the Coal Creek War. So she and I went down and did a video interview with Boomer of him chronicling, the events of the Coal Creek War. And so I think we have a snippet of that to share. And I would definitely encourage folks to see the full video is about 12 or 13 minutes, but we're going to show about a minute and a half of it. So.
The Coal Creek War is, one of many labor struggles, okay? One of many mind wars, But it's probably the only time that two of the great American social movements, labor and civil rights, interconnected and collided with each other head on. And that being the connection that the Coal Creek War had to the convict-lease system. After the Civil War, all the southern states were bankrupt. None of them had any money. So the last thing they wanted to spend money on was incarcerating criminals, right? So they came up with this bright idea. I think Alabama was the first one to come up with it, to lease out their convicts for hard labor to private companies. In Tennessee and Alabama, one company called the Tennessee Coal Iron Railroad Company, which is located in Birmingham, got a lease for all the convicts from both states, and they used them in coal mines. At the end of the Civil War, there were 200 convicts in the state of Tennessee in prisons, and they were all white. You didn't put black men in prison, you made slaves out of them. You beat them to death, whatever. By 1891, there were 1,500 convicts in the Tennessee prison sentence system, and 200 of them were white. The other 1,300 were all black.
I got to watch a little bit of that before today, Austin, and I really liked meeting Boomer. And when I was listening, we have our own Boomers up here in West Virginia that I can think of,
Yep.
and they're just such special people because this history is not the history of what happened during these conflicts with the coal industry in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's just so. The history's been buried and suppressed in many ways, and it's because of people like him that it gets told at all, that like we can be here talking about this book. So I was glad to meet him vicariously through this video, and I can just feel I can just feel like the way in which he's a history keeper.
Well, I remember one of the things early on when I pitched the idea to him, he's like, I never thought the Coal Creek War would be a comic book.
Yeah, I can imagine those words coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bet you would have loved it. Okay, Austin, I have to confess that one of my very favorite parts of this book is right at the beginning. And it starts off, so we get to hear a little bit about Boomer, but then there's this beautiful, it feels like a poem or a blessing or something.
Yeah.
But this Knights of Labor ritual. And I was so struck by it. I've shared it with multiple people now and just carried this book around and told to them. And I wonder if you'd read it aloud for us. And
sure.
I'm also curious, just like where you found it, what it means to you. It really hit me,
sure.
right in the heart.
Sure. No, so this is from something called the Adelphon Cruptus, which is it's the ritual for the Knights of Labor, which was one of the earliest labor organizations in the United States. And like any other labor organization, it had its issues. It was a very radical and progressive labor union for its time. And so I was just struck by the language in the rituals, and it was one of the things that sort of carried through in terms of the soul behind the book. So this first page is from a section of that ritual, and it says, in the beginning, God ordained that man should labor, not as a curse, but as a blessing, not as a punishment, but as a means of development, physically, mentally, morally, and has set thereunto his seal of approval for the rich increase and reward. By labor is brought forward the kindly fruits of the earth in rich abundance, sustenance and comfort. Labor is noble and holy, to glorify God in its exercise, to defend it from degradation, to divest of it the evils to body, mind, and estate, which ignorance and greed have imposed. By labor, not exhaustive, is promoted health of the body and strength of mind. Labor garners the priceless stores of wisdom and knowledge. It is the philosopher's stone. Everything it touches turns to wealth. To rescue the toiler from the grasp of the selfish is a work worthy of the noblest and best of the human race.
I love that. Anything more you want to say about it, Austin? It's just, I mean, what's it mean to you? Like, I'm so curious why you picked that.
No, I think again, that was another early on in the process before I even started drawing anything. I came across that. And that page, that first page you see, that was literally the first thing I ever drew, was those sort of images of the darkness and the light coming up with that overlay. And before I had any of the other story mapped out, that was sort of like an anchoring point. And I think, and not just that passage, but looking through just kind of the history of the Knights of Labor and their rituals, just seeing the mysticism and mythology behind the rituals, and the way in which, at a time where like folks that were organizing in this way, there was a lot of risk in doing any of this organizing work publicly. So there was a lot of people having to have, meetings in secret, and seeing the ritual as a way to sort of bind people together in sort of a common set of values, but also as like, as in a real way, kind of like this, they had to be a secret society of sorts because of the time they were operating in. Yeah. And so there was just a lot of beauty in the language that I think really carried through as sort of a through line throughout the book.
Yeah, I think I'm struck by the I don't know, the prayerfulness of it maybe, and also the aspiration of it. It's such I think that touched me. So it sounds like one of the risks you took here, according to Boomer, was turning this into a comic, a graphic novel. Another choice you made was that this book is told. It's sort of historical fiction, I think is the right name for that genre.
Yep.
It's told from the perspective of a young man in the East Tennessee coal camps in the late 1800s, and he's a fictional character experiencing these historically accurate events. And I'm curious why that choice. Why tell this history from the story of a fictional character as opposed to sort of a, I don't know, like a third person historical account?
Sure. No, for sure. And I think several reasons. I think one, just in thinking through like the books that have really impacted me, there is no shade at all to like strictly nonfiction that like uses images and illustration to sort of talk about very concrete historical events. Yeah. The stories that have impacted me most have oftentimes has been fiction, and really kind of getting at the emotion and like the what are people feeling more than just the historical facts. Yeah. And it felt like really especially with this medium of comics, it felt like we'd be missing something if we didn't do something to get at that, and like telling it. And there's also some creative freedom too, like to say like these are some key historical points that I want to stick to, and also having that creative freedom to sort of really create a dramatic through line. It felt like a fictionalized version was needed. And I think the other part of this is in doing the research of, looking at the academic texts, listening to folks like Boomer. I got a newspapers.com subscription, which if you don't know about newspapers.com, it's incredible, and was able to like look up newspapers from that period in Tennessee and nationally, the way it was being covered in the press. And something was immediately glaring about it is that there was key narratives that were missing in the historical record. And key among them, there was almost nothing from the perspective of the convict laborers. There was a lot about, interviews with miners at the time, and definitely a lot of interviews with like the politicians and state actors. But there was a gap in the historical record of the perspectives of the convicts themselves. And so it felt like, again, this using fiction would be a way to sort of, as best we know, through what is available, how do we highlight some of those stories and lift up those stories in a way that isn't necessarily present in the historical record? Well, if I could pause, I'm curious too. I know you, with your work with the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum, I know sort of telling these sort of the people's history angle is really critical. I'm curious if y'all, with your work with the Mine Wars Museum, have you kind of run across that as well? Sort of those like gaps in the historical record. How do you like tell stories that maybe aren't present in a lot of the texts?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were creating the museum, we had all these conversations with our leadership team just about like what's the story we want to tell here, or like what is it we're trying to convey. And two of the choices we made quite deliberately are that women played a really integral role in the mine wars, and we wanted to make sure that their labor and work and contributions were showcased. And similarly, one of the challenges we had was that there's not much historical record about those stories. If you pick up most of the books you pick up about the West Virginia Mine Wars don't include women's history at all, really. There's except for this incredible author who also recently passed, Dave Corbin, who was, I think, probably the historian who's done the most work about women's roles in the conflicts here in the early 1900s. And anyway, he was a real resource for us to be able to make sure that history got into the museum. And the other is the story of Black miners. And I think there's a way in which the history of the UMWA can get sort of oversimplified, that it was this like egalitarian sort of we're all miners of all races and creeds are welcome here. And in some ways that was true, and in other ways it was not true. And in many senses, Black miners were both fighting and navigating their way through the coal camps, in addition to the oppression they were facing from the industry bosses. And so I think a thing we care about is just like complexifying that story more, and not making it such a story of like simple heroes.
That's right. It is none of this is a story of individual heroes. I think that is definitely a through line.
Yeah, and it's tricky. I think I respect your choice about that, because I also think it's extra work, it's extra searching, it's extra like imagining into other people's experiences that aren't the sort of mainstream experience of what this history, or the few of us that know this history get told what it is. So
Well, I appreciate you lifting that up too, because I think that was another key point in trying to tell this story, is to not reduce it to like even like the miners as a collective being like somehow pure in intent from the start. That it was like there was from the for the first couple insurrections, when the convicts came in to undermine the workers who went on strike, the first reaction from the miners was to like direct that anger at the convicts and the prisoners that were brought in. And there was absolutely a racialized element to that. But then there's like, over the course of really like 18 months, there's something that shifts and changes. But yeah, it's a complex story that doesn't have super clear cut heroes and villains.
I like the word you use, pure. There's no like pure. There's no pure actors. Well, I think that the thing you said at the start there, Austin, about the choice for this to tell a fictionalized story, in part because I can just do a little more emotional work. I'll say that worked. Like I felt that when I was reading it, and even I think the history, in a similar way, like the history of what has happened in coal camps can get, I think, kind of sort of flattened, and there's a script system, and there's long hours and things like that. And the way that you told this story from the perspective of this young man and his family sort of get us into the scenes, or get us into the conflicts. I could really feel don't know, we got to see a little bit about his relationship with his mother and his relationship with his father and his siblings, and the way in which the strain of the environment that they were living in impacted them and their relationships too. And anyway, it just did a lot of emotional work. And I'm curious, I don't know, I want to hear you talk a little bit more about just like about the conditions that the miners and their families were in, and like what was happening. So how was power getting exercised in the coal camps?
Sure.
During.
Sure. Well, I definitely want to note I am not a historian, so this whole process has been a lot of like learning and trying to get a glimpse and understand as best I can myself. But I think from the accounts that I read, I think a theme that I really tried to pull on was this notion of a desire for some sense of freedom, especially for a lot of immigrants that had moved to Tennessee in pursuit of some sense of freedom, and what they ended up finding was constraint, and the ways in which the coal companies, in a pursuit of a cheap labor force, created an environment in which folks were quite literally trapped. And so, company scrip, which is like, the company paying not in cash, not in money, but in notes that could only be used in company stores, was one mechanism for that. The fact that the housing that the miners and their families were owned by the company.
Right.
And so you're kind of creating this where it's really hard for the miners to save up enough money that's not in scrip to be able to move somewhere else. And in fact, one of the things that came up that was just so fascinating, and I tried to include it in the book, was that there was actually laws in the state of Tennessee that were passed that limited the amount that could be paid in scrip versus money. And basically the coal companies just ignored it and just still basically just blew over those laws, and the state like very intentionally turned a blind eye to it. And so see this collaboration between the state and the companies, I think was another, and you'll see it in the later events, but like this, the way in which the coal bosses and the state work together to maintain a cheap labor force and to keep people trapped in this situation, I think stood out from the histories that I read.
And I know one of those things, Austin, that gets highlighted in the book and sounds like it's one of the sparks that sort of sets off, I don't know, the constraints that people were living under. There was sort of this like moment of eruption and people went on strike. And it sounds like one of those things that happened was that, which I also know to be true here in West Virginia, is that the company would hire the checkers and weighers to record how much, if someone was bringing out a load of coal, they would get paid by what they mined. And so the checkers and weighers would undercount what people had mined that day, and another way of getting underpaid. And I saw that in the book as sort of like one of the sparks that led to this sort of original strike.
100%. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like there had been like these building up grievances, but then again, that was another instance where the law of the state of Tennessee said that the miners were allowed to have their own check weighman. And again, it was the coal companies blew past it. They tried to petition the state. The state didn't do anything. And that's really what precipitated the strike.
So one thing I know about what coal companies do on strikes is that they'll hire strike breakers. So they'll bring in, they'll put out notice like, okay, people are on strike. We're just bring in new workers. And we don't have to deal with these strikers. And as much as I know about that history, I had never heard of this convict labor system before, and that it sounds to me like from what I read in the book that it was actually fairly prevalent in Southern mines. And I don't know, I'd love to hear more about that and what you've learned about it in writing this. That was a new form of strike breaking to me.
Yeah. So from my understanding, the use of convict labor like emerged like right after the end of the Civil War. Like it was just an
That makes
immediate,
sense.
like
Yeah.
by lost cause politicians and state actors, as well as these, landowners. It's like, all right, we got to find a way to undercut Reconstruction. And the convict lease was like a key tool in that. And so a lot of it was in like agricultural labor, lumber, and then in East Tennessee and in North Georgia, and I think Alabama was another area where convicts were used in mines in particular. But basically, there's a whole system of like laws that were created that were specifically designed to pick up predominantly black folks for petty crimes. I mean, the example I use in the book, which is a very real example of people being picked up for being at a train station without proof of a ticket. Mm. And that would be something that then they could be charged for, arrested, and then shipped directly to the coal mines. What's interesting is the terms, to make it worthwhile, it had to be like at least 12 months. The sentence for for it to be worthwhile for the coal company and for the arrangement to make sense. And so there was these whole set of laws passed that allowed sentencing to be like 12 months and 1 day.
Wow.
And so it was just explicitly designed to be really slavery by another name. And it's a great book, and it was also a short PBS series called Slavery by Another Name by an author named Douglas Blackman. It's a great resource on the subject, and he kind of talks more about some about the coal mines, but a lot about the lumber and agricultural industries and the emergence of the convict lease.
Mm. It makes me want to point out one of the sections of the book that was just, I don't know, this just sort of made me think, like, this is what a comic can do. Like, this might not have been possible through a different medium, but there's a section for the center of the book where we meet a person who is gets caught up in that system, gets trapped in that system, and it's so beautiful. It's about a dozen or so pages long, and what we see is this sharecropper who loses his land, heads to Tennessee, as you said, gets arrested at a train station at the accusation of a white woman he seems to be sitting next to on the train, and he ends up in prison and then the mines. And I think there's something special. I read this part twice, or I don't even know what the right word is for a comic, but I took this in twice, and it's really moving. I wonder if there's anything to say about what it's like to tell this part of the story through image only, or
Sure.
or what it was like for you creating it.
Yeah. No, I think that was a conscious choice. That, like, as you said, that there's like that 12-page, I think it's 12-page section that I try to not use any words, and really both as like a practice, and I think telling that story in that way, I think one of the things that came up for me is, again, like not really having like concrete historical record is kind of I think a nod to that. That we don't use words. And I also thought, like, that story, it felt like it would be muddled with dialogue or narration. The other part of that too is like a key narrative device that I use is that this young kid in the mines is sort of like narrating the story, and it felt like this wasn't his to narrate. And so like having some sort of narration behind it didn't make sense. And I think ultimately, like, really trying to say what could I convey at an emotional level about this, and the best way to do that is through pictures. And the other thing I would mention, just a inspiration for that, if folks haven't read the book Nat Turner by Kyle Baker, it's a whole like 160 page, something like that, graphic novel that maybe uses like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 sentences in the whole thing. And it tells the story of Nat Turner and the slave rebellions. But I think that was like a huge inspiration about what you could convey emotionally by not using any words at all.
Yeah, I think I learned something about that just reading it. Yeah.
And then culminating at the end of that section, it ends with, and it's, I think it may be on the slides there, but it ends in a word.
Yeah.
And a word is no, and it's a word of building up to the dropping of the pickaxe and saying no.
Yeah. Austin, I think there's a number of reasons people might want to read this book. One is they might care about East Tennessee. They might care about mining history. They might care about the convict labor system. They also might just want to look at something that's beautiful. And yeah, there's just so we just talked about one section that really stood out to me that just in its storytelling and in its imagery was beautiful. There's another image that is this. We get to meet a miner, the main narrator's father, like early in the book, and he's experiencing a lot of losses and grief and in a lot of pain. And there's this wheel that you've created that are just these scenes from different moments of his day that just cycle. The eye just like cycles through and through and through, and we get to see just the repetitiveness and I don't know, it created this sense of agony in me of just looking at him moving through his days. And
Yep.
Anyway, I don't want to miss the chance to just ask you a little bit about the artwork and
Sure.
your process of creating these images.
Yeah. No, so I think that was something I definitely I learned as I was going. But I think the basic process, and I think there's some slides that kind of show a little bit of the step by step. But basically, when I started, I had like a very broad strokes outline of like, these are the different sections. These are the beats that I want to tell. And then I would go through and pick a particular section, and sometimes it wasn't necessarily in order, but I'd pick a particular section, and then I would draw these little thumbnails. And so, in like one sketchbook page, maybe draw like 5 or 6 thumbnails. It's really small, just general, like, all right, what do I want to convey on each page? And those are just like very much just like general, very broad strokes, what I want. And then from that, I would create a rough sketch. So I'd actually kind of go to the page and think through, all right, what are the key points that need to be told in this page? Really like what is the panel layout? What needs to be conveyed? What is a creative way to share that? So then I create these rough sketches. And the process I started with was really doing that in blue pencil. And then I would, over that, I would take ink, and so an ink pen, and then do the final line work in black ink. And so what you'd end up having is that blue pencil, black ink over it, scan that in. And then in the computer in Photoshop, it's really cool. I can click a button and just say, delete everything that's blue. So all that like rough sketch underlined is gone. I'm just left with the black. And then I would print the black ink line work out on watercolor paper, and then use Inkwash. So Inkwash is basically like watercolor with black ink. And so then I would do the Inkwashes over that, scan it back in, and then I have a software with my iPad and my pen that I can make edits. Or what's really nice about the digital tools is like it helps for someone like me who's like an amateur artist. I don't do this professionally. It allows me to take more risk with the physical medium, because I know if I have to, I can go back and in the digital, I can erase something or tweak a line. So definitely like do those final tweaks. And then the very last thing I would do is plug in the narration and dialogue. And so I would do like a whole section of like 10 pages, and I wouldn't even know what the narration is or what the dialogue is. I would know precisely what I want to convey and what the emotion is behind each page. And then doing the narration and the dialogue actually was fairly easy. And now if I do another one, whether I use that same process again, that's a question. But really trying to build this around letting the images do the work, and then plugging in the dialogue and the narration for the key pieces that I have to use words for.
It makes sense to me that it happened that way, just because the visuals do so much heavy lifting that I can imagine. Yeah, I think as you describe that, I'm like, oh, I can see that was playing out.
Yeah.
I'm curious, this is maybe a little bit of my own pet interest here, Austin, but the Inkwash in particular does something to I think there's something about like this era and mines and mining community and just like the environment of living in the coal fields that has sort of like a dusty, ruddy quality to it. And there's something about the Inkwash in some of these pages that feels like I don't know, that like texture of the images in particular feels like I can feel where that place is.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's here in the coal fields.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And I think part of that, I've always liked graphic novels that use that sort of black and white, high contrast, and the inkwash. I think the other side of it too is attempting to do any sort of color. I would definitely still be working on this if I tried to do this in color. So that's right. That's I think just on a practical angle, that's there as well. But I think you're right. I think it does fit sort of the tone of the story. I hope that comes through.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to reveal too much more about how this conflict plays out, because y'all should buy this book and read it. And maybe one other note I do want to hit though is there's this great afterword at the end that I will not read or spoil, but I think what I took away from it, or what I noted about it, is that this organizing history is complicated in that, maybe similar to the story, the thing we were talking about earlier, where there's not sort of these sort of good guys and bad guys, and there's not a purity to, no one's an angel in the story. There's also a way in which the outcomes are complicated, in that there are real victories and there are real setbacks, and I don't know, there's I think you give real attention and care to the complicatedness of even sort of what played out based on these enormous organizing actions. And maybe what strikes me about it is that feels true of organizing. I think that feels true of what I know from my own life and work, and the I think more accurate histories that I appreciate get told. And I wonder if there's a lesson in that, or like what you've got a real commitment to the truth here, and there's something about that I feels like a choice that you made, and I'm wondering what meaning you make of it.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the intent behind this book was to end, and without giving spoilers away, it doesn't end on like a pretty and everything ended happily ever after. And it felt important to like end on that, and end in that place of tension. I think both the tension of like, how do the people in that place respond to what's going on, but then also in just the larger scheme as we think about organizing, and then sort of this push towards, this project of trying to create a society where everyone has dignity. And as we're thinking about our day-to-day organizing work of all the various forms of work that go on to make that happen, and the challenges, the infighting that happens, the way in which folks with money and power react every time we have a win, and to know that like part of doing good work and having wins means there's going to be a reaction from those in power, and sometimes a very heavy-handed reaction that harms. And I don't think this book, or even myself, I don't think we're trying to pose some tied in a bow answer to that. I think to me it's most important that we're acknowledging that tension, acknowledging the fact that organizing for a dignified world and a dignified society is not linear. It's not like a linear project. It looks more like this.
Yeah.
And my hope is that this book can be a reminder that that's part of the work, and we need to sit in that tension. And so I don't think this isn't. I don't think it's a spoiler for the book. I think this is part of the history. But so when the convict lease system does eventually get abolished, the next year, the state of Tennessee creates a state-run penitentiary that is also a coal mine. So after all this work to abolish the convict lease system and have this really incredible win that was fought for with blood, sweat, and tears, the state reacts by, instead of now a partnership between private industry and the state's like, well, we'll just create our own jail that serves as a coal mine. And it was an operating coal mine up until the late 60s. And so I think this is, to me, it's not a call for despair, but a call and a reminder that when we organize, when we win, there will be a reaction and there's more work to be done. But I'm curious, like, for folks watching or for you, Katey, like, what is your response to that or reaction to that or feeling about that? How does it strike you?
I've been doing some version of organizing for about 20 years, and I wish, well, part of me is like, would I have listened? But I think my younger self could have used that lesson a lot earlier. Like, I think a lot of the grief and pain I've experienced in the work has been, I don't know, sort of like in resistance to that reality. Like, I think I think my younger self really wanted like simple answers and simple victories and like feel like we were marching towards something. And the more mileage I've gotten in, the more I have learned that like we can show up with love and good planning and beautiful visions to the thing that's in front of us and do our best in that, with the materials we have and the time that we have. And that's what the work is, as opposed to some, I don't know, something I could control more.
Yep.
And I think some of the pain, the organizing, growing pains I've experienced and that I watch groups go through all the time, I think is in relationship to like that, the tension of like all of our actions matter and there's so much that is beyond our control, and both of those things are true at the same time and are constantly relating to each other. And so I think that's how I join you in the like sitting with the complexity of it is what's most true.
100%.
And I wish I probably would have saved myself some grief if like 18-year-old me didn't know that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm hoping this is like, again, I think the intent is to ask that question and to hopefully spark, how do we grapple with that? How do we grapple with that tension?
Yeah, it makes me want to ask you, like, who do you hope reads this book?
Yeah.
I hope organizers read it. Who else?
Yeah. No, I think in general, and I still hear this, like it's bizarre to me that even in this day and age with so many amazing like graphic novels and comics that just tell incredible stories, both fiction and nonfiction, that surprised how often I get the reaction of like, oh, a comic book, that's great for kids, which is true. Comic books and graphic stories are wonderful for kids. They're wonderful for people who may struggle reading quote chapter books, 100%. And I think we do a disservice. We don't recognize it is not a sub form of of literature or storytelling. It is a different form of storytelling, and it's a way that I think we can convey things in a different way than an academic text or even just like a prose nonfiction or fiction book. There's something about being able to create the drama with images that hits. So I would say, like, I feel like I preach the message that comics are for everyone. And I think the kinds of stories that we can tell through comics, there's literally no limit to the kinds of stories we can tell. And I think for stories like this in particular, that are overlooked, that often do get, and that this is no discredit at all to the academic text. The academic texts are so critical and important. The work that Karen Shapiro did in a book called New South Rebellion, really documenting the nitty-gritty details of the story, is essential. And it is a small handful of people that are going to be able to read that, or that are going to have a desire to read that. And so I think we need to have ways to share these stories in a way that are accessible for many people. And I think my hope is that this is a small way of doing that for this little piece of East Tennessee history that's, I think, part of the broader patchwork of stories that have really fed our movements today.
I hope everyone who's listening in right now reads this. One of the people who reads it, and I wonder, can I just ask you some brass tacks questions, Austin?
Sure.
Like, where can folks order it?
Yeah, so I think it'll come on after this, and it may be in the chat, but ordering directly from Haymarket Books is always good. Love supporting our independent book publishers and distributors. It's also available on Amazon and other platforms as well. And there's, I don't have the list in front of me, but we're doing our best to get it out into bookstores in the region as well.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, first stop would be go directly to Haymarket's site to order it.
Okay. I imagine that people might want to find you online. What's a good handle to track you down?
Yeah, so I'm still like, I'm not a huge social media user. I do on my Instagram. I try to post somewhat regularly, but for my Instagram, it would be at Austin Sauerbrei, which is just my full name. And you can follow me on there, and I'm hoping to at some point start some new projects. So we'll try to post stuff on there. I don't have Twitter or TikTok or any of that. So Instagram would probably be the best place to follow.
Okay. And then I'm hoping that this book ends up in the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum. We have a big book area in our gift shop, and I don't know. I can imagine teachers using this, or union organizers, or book clubs, or I'm curious if there's folks that might want to, I don't know, host you or have a discussion about it or use it as an educational tool. Like, what's a good next step?
100%. I would say email me. The email is very simple. It's my full name, austinsauerbrei@gmail.com. So that's the best way to get in touch. Would love to help, whether it's like me being part of it or not, help to facilitate those sorts of conversations. That's like, I think what my big hope is for this book is that people use it as a conversation tool. I think in Tennessee, we're talking about with some of my labor friends doing some sort of a tour in the fall in Tennessee. I know we'll be doing an event in Knoxville at Union Avenue Books, and we'll be planning another event near Knoxville. I think one in Chattanooga coming up as well, and probably trying to do one in Middle and West Tennessee as well. For folks outside of the region, would love to be in touch, to see if there's a way that y'all could put the book to use, or that I could be in conversation with y'all. And I do want to note that other point around the use in the classroom. Would be very interested if there's folks at a district level. I think this feels probably most appropriate for like high school Tennessee history curriculum. But would definitely be interested in folks that are considering how this may be used in a classroom context within sort of Tennessee history curriculum.
Cool. I'm curious about that too. I hope someone reaches out to you about it. Okay, we have a little time for questions, and I think they're coming in. So I'm gonna lob a few your way.
Sure.
So one that we've got is, what parts of the story were most difficult to have to leave out for brevity's sake?
Yeah. That is a great question, and one that that was like the biggest struggle throughout the whole process. So I think the top of the list one is I end my story before the final insurrection and occupation by the state militia. And I think that was one that I went back and forth on of like, there's a whole nother after the series of the first three insurrections, there was a whole year of occupation by the state of this town, and sort of the miners going up into the hills and the trees and sort of like peppering buckshot down on the occupying force. And some real points of drama within that. And so I went back and forth of whether to try to write that whole section as like a final chapter. And part of it was like, I'd been doing this project for 4.5 years, and I was like, that's going to be like another 6 months to do that. So that would certainly played into it. I think the other side though too is like thinking in the narrative, there also seemed to be something about the way that I ended it where I did, and ending it on this question point between the story of this father and son that seemed to be at like a narrative logical ending point. So I'd say that was probably the one that I struggled with the most, but there was like all throughout, there's like, lots of little pieces. And I tried to come back to like, what's actually carrying the heart of the story through, and trying to stay true to that.
I know I've got another question about your choice to make this a piece of historical fiction, and I wanted to ask you more about, you just alluded to it, but this father-son relationship. So one of the key dynamics in the story is that that I think the nature of this being historical fiction really supports is there's a son who's sort of more allied with the striking miners, and there's a father figure who's, I wouldn't even say he's allied with the companies. He's sort of more like resigned to his, there's like a level of resignation. And I wonder a bit about, your choice to like have that, create that, show that tension in that family dynamic, and what it represented to you in terms of what was happening more broadly in the coal camps.
Yeah. No, well, I think those two, it's like, as I read through like the history, those were two very like prevalent themes. And there were like accounts of like miners joining the militia. And I just was like, imagining, well, what would that look like within like folks who knew each other within this community? How would that tension play out? But even more so, like, how would that tension play out between, members of a family, in this case, like a father and a son? And it felt like that was like, again, like a way to convey these bigger themes that were real, that did happen, but do it in like a dramatic way that sort of fit a narrative. So I think that was sort of the origin of that, of trying to how to take these themes that are very real and personify them in some way.
Yeah. And I imagine that happened. I imagine there are families that were split. I mean, that's certainly true in the mine wars here, that there were sides and people picked them.
Well, and that tension too, and like, and this is maybe going back to the first question too, of like, what you leave in, what you leave out. I would have, if I would have had 3 more years or whatever to work on this, I think I would have loved to dive in even more to that relationship. And like, to me, that's another real theme of like, that connects to our work today, of like, what are the ways that we still can, whether it's family members or folks in our community, that we see their participation in harm, And how is there that accountability and also like that love? And that's that's a tension that I think we all deal with in some form or fashion. And I think would have loved to have been able to like dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah. All right, we have time for one last question. This one says, there have been recent coal miner strikes in the last few years. Do you feel that those workers still feel the weight of the history of previous labor battles, like the one in the book?
That is a great question, and one that I don't feel qualified to answer. But I love that question. Yeah, I do think like even beyond just minor strikes, like thinking about, I mean, Katey, I know you knew about the West Virginia teacher strikes, and I'm sure you knew lots of people involved in that. And like, here in East Tennessee and Chattanooga, there was a huge push for the unionization effort around VW. And so it definitely feels like there's themes that feel like echoes in many ways, but to the degree to which like that weight of that history is felt by the people involved today, I don't know. That's a good question. Katey, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I think I see it most alive I think I see some of these histories most alive in older miners that are part of UMWA, like those when I'm in those union halls and like among that community of people, I can feel part of it is just the nature of the union hall, which is that there's like the history is all over the walls, and there's and people have been through things together, so they'll tell stories of, in the case of this particular local that I'm especially close to, they'll tell stories of strikes in the 80s and 90s that they were all a part of, and their fathers were coal miners, and so they have stories that they've inherited from their fathers. And I think I also join your I don't know question, or your I don't know response, Austin, because I think that the UMWA is a different thing than it used to be, and there's a lot of, and the way that organized labor is in our nation right now is a different thing than it used to be. And so I maybe I just joined the question of like, I wonder to what extent folks carry this history in their hearts. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know in East Tennessee, like coal mining pretty much does not exist. It doesn't really exist in Tennessee anymore. And I think that a lot of that was like a lot of reasons why. But I also see like that, the tensions between like, for a lot of coal miners, this is their livelihood and their work. And like, other folks seeing like the harm of the coal industry on the land. And I think those things in tension too feels very, has been historically very, very real. And I think in present day too.
Well, I hope folks will order this book. I'm so glad I have a copy of it. I hope you'll find Austin on social media and reach out to Austin and share this book with other people. Go to Haymarket, get the book. We'd also love to have you at the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum if you're ever in Mingo County, West Virginia. We're a people's history museum there that is all about telling stories like this one, and especially the stories of the conflicts between miners and the coal industry in the early 1900s in southern West Virginia as the UMWA was trying to take hold. And this is I just am struck by the beauty of this conversation in terms of the visuals that we have here. And so I also hope folks will take a second to share this online so other people can just see the beautiful images that Austin has created. And thanks again to Haymarket. It's such a treat to be here. And I'm so, in the wacky time that we're in, I'm really glad that there's a publishing house like this one. Austin, any final words from you?
Yeah, then just so much gratitude for this conversation, and to Haymarket and Katey for you for taking time to have this conversation. And I want to mention too that like a lot of this work was me at a desk, with my pencil and pen and ink, but there was like so many people that poured into this. There was, I had a crew early on. This was during COVID, of a few of my good friends that we would jump on Saturday morning Zoom call and have coffee, and they would help me sort of chat and brainstorm. And these are other organizers and just good friends that would help me think through things. My wife Claire, who's like been probably my outside of Eric at Haymarket, my chief editor for this, and really helping to encourage me to finish the project, even though it went about 3 years longer than I thought it was going to. And then so many other folks, all the folks at Haymarket, Eric Curl in particular as an editor, it's just been incredible and giving me the opportunity to have a project with a deadline, even though I pushed past the deadline multiple times, and seeing a published work, just immense gratitude for everybody. So.
Great. Thanks, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks, y'all.